Welcome to Hero or Disruptor, exploring the power of teaching metaphors. I'm Garth Neufeld. In this series, Jane Hallinan and I take a deep dive into the hero's journey as applied to teaching, while also considering the transformational power of disruption. So where will you see yourself? As a guide to the next generation of heroes? Or as a disruptor of the status quo? Wherever you find yourself, thanks for joining us on this journey. Jane, we think this is the final episode of a series that we are now calling, hold on, Hero or Disruptor? Question mark. Which one are you? And we've been exploring this question. We've been exploring symbolism and metaphor in teaching. And here we find ourselves at the end of a hero's journey. I think we've exhausted the metaphor, which is great. It's exactly what I was hoping to do at some point. How was this for you? How were these conversations? And did you find yourself, changed by them, thinking about them? Did you?
Oh, I thought about them a lot. You've been a sort of fixture in my life now for every week for the past 2 months. And so never exactly knowing where we're going to go with the next conversation has been pretty interesting because I think we have found ourselves in places where, the places you'll go, we didn't quite expect this one. And so I think that is pretty instructive about creative process, that it's not a straight line. It's something that produces lots of turns and unexpected surprises and cul-de-sacs and clarifications and all of the things that people who can't tolerate ambiguity cannot abide.
Yeah. The exploration of an idea was interesting to record. We found ourselves circling, but over time, those circles got smaller and smaller. And that's what I love about, especially with another person, to talk through a creative process with another person. Do you find that this, I know we've talked about in our other series, we've talked about kind of creative process in writing. And if I recall correctly, that ideas often for you just occur to you. Almost like we both agree that it's almost like the muse taps you on the shoulder and says this.
Yes.
Now, is that generally quite clear to you, or do you go through this creative process sometimes, even when you just, if you get a flicker of light, how do you find that full light is, I guess, the question. Yeah.
That's an interesting metaphor too. Usually whenever the muse taps me on the shoulder, there's enough there that I probably don't do quite as much meandering as you and I did. But I think it's also the case that when I'm trying to define a project, I'm not necessarily doing that with other people. Yeah. If I'm going to collaborate with people, I probably have a pretty good idea about the end game and the roles that people play. And I know that produces, I can sometimes be a benevolent overlord. I can sometimes be kind of boss lady about, do this, let's fix this. So I think what was fun about this was your direction about wanting to explore specifically the hero's piece, especially when, that's not a metaphor that I think fits me and how I think about teaching. And so that caused me to do some stretching. It's like, well, why is it that doesn't have appeal? And okay. So now we're back to what works for one teacher may not work for other teachers, whether you're talking about metaphors or whether you're talking about lecture styles or assessment strategies, that this is such an individualized process that I found it pretty fun to watch how your brain unfolded.
Well, I found that, thank you. And I found that in the end, I was relying a lot on your years of teaching experience to give voice to some of the ideas I had. And not like I don't have some teaching experience, but you were always really quick. And it's one of the things I really like about talking with you is that you are very quick to think of examples, classroom examples, really recent examples. These are not things that you're just kind of bringing up in talks all the time. It's like, these are you have experiences to call on immediately.
I do.
Yeah.
I think I'm blessed that way. In fact, an author I like, I think his name is Gerganis, wrote a book called The Oldest Living Confederate Widow. And he had a knack for making little phrases. And one of the phrases that stood out for me, besides never trust a soprano, is stories happen to people who can tell them. And there is, I don't know if it's my Irish lineage or I don't know what sources. I can't explain why it is that I can have an experience and turn it into a story, but that's always been an interesting knack that I've had. And so capturing experience in the immediate past is relatively easy for me to do.
Stories are so much more interesting than people talking to you about something, aren't they?
It's true. And I think you can recognize that in the classroom, that, you pull out your PowerPoint, you drone on, and then you say, now let me tell you a story. Boom. Now you've got people's attention because they are simply going to be listening from the preferred part of their brain instead of the science part of their brain.
Yeah. Even
if what we're trying to do is teach them science, the value of the story is pretty profound.
And I think that there is, I think that there's probably a body of literature out there that would give us some reason why we prefer stories and why we're drawn to stories. But I would say with some amount of confidence that there's something in us that does prefer to hear information that way, does engage us fundamentally. And so this is why the hero's journey to me is such an interesting way to approach teaching, to approach lessons, to think about your students, is that it's a story-based way of understanding the student journey or teaching as a metaphor. And so I really think that if you can tap into it, that metaphor, that it will resonate, even if you're not explicit. And this is one of the things I've been dealing with. Do I need to tell people that they are heroes or students that they are heroes? Do they need to know what the ingredients are to enjoy the final, result of it, which is I'm now mixing.
Do you have to give them the map and the destination is what you're asking? That's
the one. Yeah.
And I can't say I know the answer to that, because I think sticking with your metaphor, I think there's an element of timing that needs to happen in order for students to embrace the idea that what they're doing is heroic or has the potential to be heroic. And so I suspect, now keep in mind, time stamping this, I'm finishing up finals, right? And so I've certainly seen my share of student maybe not great behavior in the past couple of weeks. Go right to the assignment, don't do any of the prep work, don't look at the models. There are students that are not ready for a hero's metaphor.
Yep.
And so I think that's why the hero's metaphor, and in fact, there are probably teachers who might not be ready. I might be a teacher not ready for a hero's metaphor. But I think, to come back full circle to the importance of stories, the metaphor sets the framework for the narrative that you tell yourself. And so whether you are a gatekeeper or you are a talking head lecturer, or whatever metaphor drives what you do, you can end up with that as a framework to hang your stories on. So that's why being a disturber of the peace or a disruptor works so well for me, because I'm doing that all the time, and it's relatively easy for me to generate a narrative that illustrates that.
I think we talked about this in previous episodes, but when you have that well thought through metaphor, even if it's for a time until a new metaphor occurs to you, you can not only hang those stories on it, but it's like the secure base. It's the foundation. It's the walls. It's the boundaries that keep you, that keep you aligned. It's when you get lost. What do I do with this assignment? What do I do with this particular student? It can be this foundational, or let me just. Yeah, secure all those things I just said, but it can be that boundary that shows you the next step to take, so you don't feel lost.
Well, correct. And I think just pushing disruption a bit further, when I get the impression that my students are bored with what I'm doing, I turn to disruption as my strategy.
Yep.
And while I build in a lot of disruption along the way, it's really easy for me to whip out a story to disrupt the attention problem that I'm seeing in my class. Or, I can respond to it and say, wow, you guys are a dead lot today. How about everybody stand up and shake it out and see if you can get some blood moving to your brain so that we can have a better conversation? And they'll laugh and I'll laugh, and then we'll do a little exercise. And then, that disruption, I think, communicates a lot about how I think about them, how I think about teaching. But it is exactly that, a foundation with appropriate parameters that guide what I do. Yeah.
I like that. Let's talk about disrupting for a minute, because you just use in a moment in a class when it occurs to you, just in time, you see this happening and you think, I'm a disruptor. Probably not like that. It's more automatic, but you think I'm a disruptor and this needs to be disrupted right now. But also, we've talked about things like student advising or writing letters for students. And there are moments where the disruptor metaphor works really, really well. Like, this student thinks this is okay and it's really not. And that pattern needs to be disrupted right now.
It does. And disruption doesn't necessarily mean with carnage.
Yep.
I happen to be writing quite a few capstone evaluations right now where students, I ask them to do a self-assessment. I want them to tell me how well they think they did, and I want them to tell me where their weaknesses are so that I know how to give them feedback that they can use. And sometimes, more often than I'd like, I'm turning back feedback that is not consistent with where they are. And the fact that I know they're going to be hugely disappointed when they get back this C or whatever it is, then I'm going to disrupt, but I'm also going to figure out ways to embed that disruption in. Here are some great things that you did. Now let's talk about why this doesn't quite meet your expectation about how well this is going to score and what you'll do about it in the future. So, I mean, that's a kind of disruption sometimes just feels so turbulent and chaotic, and that's not quite what I mean. I just mean that you dealing with the unexpected and building the unexpected into what you do.
I'm processing what you just said. Dealing with the unexpected. Okay. Does this metaphor work for you professionally in your work, nationally as well? Do you see yourself as a bit of a disturber?
What an interesting question. When I'm doing national kinds of projects, I don't think I do see myself as, well, could that be?
Or institutional, we can kind of work our way out.
Yeah, well, institutions are kind of a different story, given that I've had such an interesting history in which I've been disrupted a couple times. I think I'm going to say probably not as much, and part of the reason for that is I don't necessarily see among my peers that what I'm trying to do is exert influence that will transform them. If I do, great. But I don't necessarily, I'm not strategic about that. I'm not thinking, now, how can I dislodge someone? How can I pose something that will give them a moment of discomfort? So that
maybe it's when
peers.
Maybe it's when you're in that guide position, because I've definitely been at a talk. We talked about the alchemy talk. I've seen you give talks on assessment. I remember an early talk when you were, when you were discussing assessment. I remember being disrupted I almost said disturbed. It wasn't disturbed.
Okay.
It was disrupted.
Disturbed. I like disturbed. Disturbed. I like disturbed.
But no, it was like opening my eyes to,
Okay.
hey, you don't have to hate assessment. In fact, and it's always that image or that slide you use where you can place yourself on the scale.
Yeah.
Right. But and this is not this is how it can help you, and this is not something to be afraid of necessarily. And so.
Okay. All right. So let me qualify what I just said.
Sure.
I was thinking more in terms of the kinds of projects that I've been involved nationally, where I'm working with a collaboration of people.
Yep.
And so, right now, the collaboration that's most on my mind, of course, is Guidelines 3.0, which, goodness, it looks like we're coming to the end of that draft proposal. Yay. And I certainly don't see myself as a disruptor with the peers that I'm working with.
Yep.
But if we're talking about speech giving, about the work that I care about, oh yeah, I'm a disruptor there. I don't have any problems owning that.
Right. Yeah, I'm seeing now where our metaphors that we prefer kind of meet each other. So we did a lot of talking about the guide, and I think that's what we're getting at here is when you're playing the role of guide. What I would call guide. There's lots of different words for it, but when you're playing the role of guide in certain situations, that the way you guide is by being a disturber of the peace. That's one of the ways that you guide people.
It's certainly one avenue for how to do that. And then some forms of collaboration, that would be a wrong choice.
Right. Yes. And then I also see in the hero's journey, the first step is the call. So the call for the hero to move, to take some sort of action, that whatever we're doing here, the status quo, whatever is not working, the hero gets called. And again, I think that's a disruption. I think your worldview is your way of doing things, your day-to-day life is this one way. And then we feel this call to, and it could be, I need to go to this graduate program, or I need to volunteer at this place, off air, you and I were talking about an inner voice. That inner voice speaks, and we think we get called to it. But I think also students get called by certain faculty or instructors or teachers that they have. I
would agree with that. I would agree with that. And I think one of the reasons that I do like disruption is it's fundamentally Piagetian in looking at equilibrium, disequilibrium. And I know if I use the right touch to push my students off balance, they'll right themselves by thinking. And so that's my goal. And I'm pretty comfortable with trying to figure out how hard do I have to push to get that kind of action.
Yeah, so many of those, this is not my area by any means, but so many of those developmental theories, especially the cognitive ones, they really are based on this. Here's the status quo, and then there's a disruption to the status quo, and everything falls apart, and then you piece it back together. And that can be in really small ways. That can also be in like really life-changing ways for people when they have a worldview challenged. Which, by the way, our students are going through, hopefully, while they're in our courses, right?
Well, I think that even extends to that. Do we call them to be heroic, or do we call them to join the community of scholars? We talked about that over the course of the last 7 weeks. Do we disrupt them by helping them discover skills and talents that they didn't know they had? That's my favorite kind of disruption, when you can pronounce somebody as having done something that far surpasses what they themselves thought they were capable of. How fun is that? There's no more fun in life as a teacher than that. Yeah,
that's an interesting point. Whatever metaphor people are going to use, I hope that it's life-giving, and you've done a nice job even in this last conversation of making sure that we know that disruption is not crushing. It's not meant to.
I try to make sure it's not crushing. I may not always succeed, because once in a while I'll get some feedback on my student evaluations that I'm rude, or sometimes I'll get, oh, she's arrogant. Then I think, have you dealt with confident women in your in your history. There's a difference. There's a difference. But yeah. So I know not all students respond. The vast majority do, happily. I have great relationships with most of my students, but there are students that really don't like how I approach things. They find it too busy work oriented, or too challenging, or too upsetting, or too something. It doesn't match their style.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I was also surprised in the course of these conversations, just to what you're talking about. I was surprised that there are moments, and I think a good guide does this. There are moments where you draw, not without empathy, but you draw a line in the sand for students.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about how that can be a gift for students, but you don't get to choose when it's the thing that is going to kind of send students on to greatness, versus if it is going to be the thing that is, the crush is too harsh a word, but is going to be too much for them to bear. At the same time, that's not always our responsibility. And so it's a fine line teachers walk, and we never know students. I teach 11-week quarters. I just don't get to know them to the level I'd like to. And so one of the things that rings up for me from a few weeks ago is when you said that you always try to do what's in the best interest of the student to the best of your ability. So how do you balance doing disturbing students in a way where it's you're trying to do the best thing you can for them, knowing that may not actually, there will be a subset of students that will not push them to greatness, that will be the end of the line for them somehow?
This is, it's a little bit of a painful example, but this time of year, I sometimes have conversations with students about, you did some good things in the class, but I'm taking a look at the long term and the projected grade. And I think what would be in your best interest is to stop this course and reallocate your energies where you're going to be successful, because it doesn't look like that's going to happen here. And I know that's awful news for students to receive, but I also know I am doing what's in the long-term best interest, because the markers are clearly there that the student's going to fail no matter what they do at this point. Even though I have to say, I once had this fascinating conversation with a young man in my class. I had done the calculations. There was no way, if he was perfect on all remaining assignments, there's no way he could get into the passing range. So I just said, it's probably time for you to stop, because you can't pass the course. And he said, well, no, I'm going to try. And I said, well, let's try this again. I have worked this out mathematically. I've added up. I've looked at everything that's available to you. And even if you do it perfectly, you're still in the failing range. So you need to retreat. You need to reallocate your time. And he said, no, but I just want to try. So we cycled through that 3 or 4 times. And then I finally just said, do what you want. I have advised you to the best of my ability that this is not going to result in a happy end. And he said, but I'm still going to try. Now, I don't know what was going on there. I suspect he thought I would be too nice to fail somebody. Mm-hmm. And that clunk-headed belief got him into that cul-de-sac. But just a fascinating conversation. Here's the math. Let me show you the math. It's not going to work.
Do you ever?
I'm going to try.
Do you ever make the one person exceptions in your courses, or is the law the law? Okay, yeah,
I do. I kind of I think Rosenhan was the one that came up with the concept of a social bank account. That in my class, I consider students building social bank accounts throughout. And if they have shown me good faith effort, I'm likely to work with them if they run into trouble. If I have not seen good faith effort, if I've seen erratic performance, not coming to class, not doing assignments, then no. So it's predicated on the student has shown me there is an intention to be successful. Example, just in my classes this semester, a student who fell ill with something and then compounded it with COVID, fell dramatically behind, but she let me know right off the bat that her health was coming apart at the seams and she desperately wanted to complete the class. Would I work with her? And I've always said, you talk to me ahead of time, I'm good with that. Whereas another student comes at the end of the semester, obviously not paying attention, not doing work, claiming after 12 weeks, I'm having mental health issues. That's why I can't. It's like, this is after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
And after the fact, on this social bank account, no, I'm not going to cut you a lot of slack about that, because I think the larger interest, the painful thing is you're probably going to have to pay for this course again, because this time it's not going to work out for you.
It's unbelievable, and it's a skill. It's unbelievable to me how students don't understand that investing in that social capital, in that bank, with their instructor, into that relationship, can go so far. I tell my students, I say, I try to be as unbiased as possible. But if you and I have a relationship, and this is for all of your instructors, if you and I have a relationship and that paper comes across my desk and your name is on it, I'm sorry, I am biased. It is not something I intend to do. I am a human being. And if we have a good rapport, there is a different way that I am going to read that paper than if a student is not coming to my class, or if I'm like, who is this student? And we're 6 weeks into the course and I've never seen the student's name before and they're finally turning things in. It's just different. I'm not proud of it. I know that proper assessment probably, or, just fairness works if we can be completely neutral, but I also think that's just a hoax. So.
Well, I think it's one of the reasons that so many people recommend blind assessment, blind reading, so that you don't have those preliminary thoughts. But I think if you get to know your students, you can sort of tell who's written what without having their names on it.
Yeah.
Just because you know what the tendencies are, what the practices are, what the student voice is. At least for the students that are likely to garner that kind of positive bias. And of course, I think we all recognize now, because of all the work that's been done in social psychology about bias, that I think we should stop apologizing about being bias generating. We're designed that way. The trick is, what strategies can you have to try to neutralize bias that's unfair? That's the trick. Right.
And this definitely can lead very quickly into equity conversations and all those other things as well. Even if you are doing a good job, some, like my learning management system, will allow me to grade things blindly, which is fantastic. But if students are coming to you with their work ahead of time, like the good students often do, and say, hey, what do you think about this draft or whatever? I'm going to see it again, right? I'm going to see it again when I go to grade it. And there's going to, if I don't even remember who the student is, it's going to be familiar. And there's something in me as an instructor that says, wow, this student really did work hard on this. I recognize this, this work.
And that probably is going to bias the student or bias your response to the student in ways that certainly won't hurt the student, but will raise some specter about the degree to which you're showing favoritism, and on what basis are you showing favoritism? Is it, if we examine that closely, is it that you're doing that with students who are like you, that remind you of people that you grew up with? That's the challenge that I think all of us have to look at squarely and try to figure out ways to counter that.
Yeah. One of the things that I really loved about this hero's metaphor that's coming up for me now is the relational piece between guide and hero. And what we're talking about now is that those students who have a relationship, and we talked about the agreement of the relationship between guide and hero, teacher and student, that when you step into that relationship, that well, and the ways that we step into that relationship do affect outcomes. And so if a student is coming with those drafts, or is coming with questions, or is telling you ahead of time, listen, I got COVID and that paper is not going to be in, and what can we do about that? And follows your policies. That all those things are kind of the are the students saying, I'm coming, I'm agreeing to this relationship, to the way things are.
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
Yeah. And so there are a lot of, when we talk about the call to action, or the call to kind of the journey, many students they are not going to be in that relationship with their instructor because they haven't said yes to the journey.
They haven't said yes. And in fairness, many of my students wouldn't have time to say yes because of the amount that they work, or they have fallen into this stupid idea that if they can get through their education really quickly by taking too many courses at once, they can get out sooner, even though they shortchange themselves because they don't have time to invest to make the tuition really worth paying. There are a lot of reasons why students might not be willing to accept the call. Let alone they might not like the cut of your jib. They just might not like the particular way you issue the invitation. Yep.
Yeah. I was one of those students who just took as many classes as I could, as quickly as I could. I did that in my with my undergraduate experience. I did that with my graduate experience. I just took as much as I possibly could, and I missed out on so much. I have friends who went through, obviously, at normal rates, and it's funny. Sure, it put me ahead in the timeline, but it really put me behind in the skills and knowledge. And those are the kinds of stories that we can tell the students, and hopefully would resonate with them.
I could see my students nodding yes to that one.
Well, it makes a whole lot of sense when you think through the fact that there's just so much time. This is what students think, and I was having this conversation with my 9-year-old the other day. Actually, she was talking about, I think we were talking about like what she wants to do when she grows up or whatever. And she said, she talked about going through, like, if she was going to be an architect or a doctor or something like that, that she'd go through really fast. And I got to have that nice parent moment where I said, yeah, but think about all the things you'd miss out on if you went too fast, and just bring her back to it. 'Cause nobody did that for me, and that's what a lot of our students are facing, is no mentors who are, or no margin. We've talked about margin as well in these conversations. No margin to be able to have the luxury of slowing down and really engaging in education.
Well, and again, we've discussed the fact that many of our students are there to get the paper. Yeah. And so being called to something would interfere with that goal. And those are the ones where, especially when you've got students who clearly have talent, and yet they mess up a lot. And you can see that the talent is there. I just had a conversation with one of my capstone students just this week, in which he was lamenting the fact that he hadn't figured out how to pull everything together in time. And, he can do the work, but he doesn't have the infrastructure to be able to have the staying power and the resilience. Great that he has that insight before he graduates, but now he's created a track record that if he decides that he wants to apply that good brain that's in there, he's developed a lot of obstacles that will be in the way of getting that kind of pathway.
Yeah. Another great example from your teaching experience with your students of how this kind of works itself out.
This week was rife with examples. This is the last week of classes. So, oh my God, there were examples.
Hey, do you have any, I'll put you on the spot, any heroes, any heroic students, as you've come to the end of this semester that you are really looking forward to seeing what they do?
I do. Actually, there's a pair that pops to mind right off the bat. I have a married couple in one of my classes who they're non-traditional age students. And they are of the Ink and Pierce persuasion.
Uh-huh.
And they're, from the outset in class, they were, a little timid at first, but over the course of the semester, I watched them be able to get voice. And I was able to witness these two people. I put them on group projects that were different. They were mad at me about that because I wasn't going to allow a husband and wife to work together on projects. So I put them on different projects in my social psychology class, and they ended up doing just remarkable work, not just conceptually, but ultimately being able to deliver a group presentation that sort of knocked my socks off. So proud of them. And it turns out that this particular couple, they both did their projects on homelessness because they had been homeless together with 3 children, trying to figure out how to navigate that ordeal. And they turned that into, one project was developing a grant proposal. I teach students how to write grant proposals just in case they go into human services. One was a grant proposal on getting low-cost veterinary care for people without means so that pets can get better treatment. And the other was this absolutely hysterical presentation on developing a mobile unit that would go where homeless people are to take care of their needs. And the title was amazing. It was Sisterhood of the Traveling Pantries.
That'll work.
I mean, but that was the caliber of what we were talking about, that they went from being timid and nervous to doing something that their classmates cheered for.
Yeah.
And learned a lot along the way. And so I recognize they're going to be taking another class with me next semester. And all I can do is go, whoopee. I get a little bit more of that experience in watching them grow and change.
I love it. I have a student who I would call heroic. I've had her for 3 classes now. We do there are 3 classes that students at my college need to get into the major at the University of Washington, Seattle. And so I had her for general psych and research methods, and now biopsych we're just finishing up. And she's now been accepted into it. Now, this student, she was in construction for a entire career. And, but then also had some, mental health issues, some fairly severe ones that came up. She's the funniest. I won't divulge too much, but she refers to it as the nut house is the way that she refers to it. But she has made me laugh so many times reading her papers. Such a passionate, I think blue collar, just from what I know, background, probably first generation, and has a knack and just this insatiable desire to learn. So I was just reading a post where she was talking to another student. By the way, this is not a post for points. This is just the general class. Hey, we can chat and hear posts. So this is the kind of student she is, where she was talking about how somebody said, hey, you can use Google Scholar in this way to blah, blah, blah. And then she extended that knowledge and then said, this is my favorite part of what we do. But then I go down this like rabbit trail of all this research, just reading research. Anyway, I am sad to lose her. I am so happy she's overcome so much in her life, and has kind of shared a lot of that with me through her work. And so it's students like that remind us that it's special. It's special. Yeah. Well,
and I confess, yesterday when I said goodbye to my social class, I teared up.
Oh.
I remember saying, I've taught social psychology for 40 years. This is the most fun I've ever had teaching social psychology, and I'm grateful to you.
Oh.
And even talking about it now chokes me up.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope to have more over the years, more emotional connection to my classes in that way. I think early career, I was, I guess that's one of the nice things about teaching smaller classes, right? Is you can actually get to know your students. Mine are kind of in that mid range where it's hard, but but
And
not
mid-range, you mean what size are we talking about?
like 33.
Okay.
So it's not
my
hundreds.
classes have 40,
Yeah,
45. Yeah.
yeah. But I think in early career, there's so much you're paying attention to. Well, especially for me, I didn't know what I was doing. I don't know how many teachers do in higher education.
Not very many. Not very many.
But I was so focused on what I should be doing, which is content, give the content, that I forgot that these are humans with stories and that they bring themselves to this work and that we're all doing together. And so as I get a little further in my career, it's easier to, and this pandemic has actually been helpful. It's easier to connect with them on that kind of human level, not just as their instructor, right? But
and I've always collected data on my students so that I can surprise them with what I remember about them in my examples. But COVID taught me the power of asking them to do video. And so my standard now is, I'm going to tell you 10 things about me, and I want you to tell me 10 things about you. And sometimes I'll say, and in this, here are a couple things for sure I want to know. But, other than that, embroider. And that's always fascinating to be able to understand the stories that students themselves bring to the situation. It's always humbling.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jane, this has been a nice ride. I think this particular ride is over, but I look forward to the next one. Now, I'm going to put you on the spot because in the intro of the first episode, I talked about the reason why I first approached you about this particular conversation was because I thought it might have been a writing project, and I thought, who better to approach for a writing project than Jane? Now you got a lot going on, but do you think that this idea sits here in this podcast form and that's where it sits? Or does it strike you that there's something here worth pursuing? And not to put you on the spot to sign up now, but is this something that should be written about?
I think it could be written about. I'm not sure I can answer should it be, because you can write things and then they don't go anywhere.
That's right. Yeah.
There is a demand, a need in higher education for new and disruptive ways of thinking about what we do. Metaphor thinking is not new. The hero approach would be new if you wanted to go in that direction. But I have a feeling, knowing you, I'm thinking it would be more fun if you figured out how to workshop this idea.
Yeah.
So that it becomes something that is a higher education kind of consultation that would be accessible, maybe not especially, could be for community college, could be for 4-year, something that provides renewal, especially at a time when faculty are kind of worn out. I think it would provide some re-energizing that would be really important. And the fact is, producing a book takes a hell of a long time. Putting together a consultation on that theme does not take that long. And then you just have to figure out how to market it and have fun with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And oh, by the way, make money with it. That's another
we do that?
element.
Do we make money?
Yeah, consultants can make money. Maybe in higher education, not so much until you get a great big name.
Yep.
And if your workshop produced legs, I mean, if it worked well, then I think you'd have an indication that the book would work. But I'm not sure the book would work as is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when I think about the flow, and by the way, that's bang on. I think the workshop idea is a fantastic one. And it's, and we worked on a workshop sort of like this for ideas before, you and I. But this is, I am now, just to kind of bring this thing home, when I think about the hero's journey, I see this disruption metaphor all throughout it, actually. I think they work kind of nicely together. And I wonder if, because it's symbolism, if in the end, once you get down to these metaphors that people are going to choose for themselves, whether they all do connect, because we're all essentially trying to give voice to the same thing, which is that we want students to be successful.
I think that makes sense. And I think our conversations do help me understand and maybe appreciate a bit more the magnificence of thinking of it from a hero standpoint. I think that gives it a different scope, maybe a different level of significance than I'm just going to come in and mess around and tilt you and make you go upright. I mean, I think yours is a grander vision than mine. But what I like about the conversations we've had is the way that to see how they fit together.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that we identified in this conversation is that one of the things that the hero's journey is different is that it is a story. It's the full circle. So it might be more connective. Jane, thank you for your time, and I'll miss these weekly meetings until we have a new idea, right?
Okay. Well, I'll let you know when the muse descends.
Love it. Thanks.
All right. Take care.